little girl interrupted. "My daddy saved me from you." In a silent courtroom, a trembling little girl pointed at the judge's own son, and the shocking truth ripped through the town like fire. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Dawn crept through the worn curtains of the small kitchen as Daniel Carter stood at the stove, carefully flipping the last pancake. The sizzle of butter on the pan filled the quiet morning air. His weathered hands moved with practiced care, making sure the edges were perfectly golden brown, just the way Lily liked them. "Sweetie, breakfast is almost ready," he called out, his voice warm despite the exhaustion that clung to him from yesterday's double shift at the warehouse. The sound of small feet padding down the hallway brought a smile to his face. 8-year-old Lily appeared in her favorite pink pajamas, her brown hair still messy from sleep. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the pancakes. "Daddy, you made Mickey Mouse shapes." She climbed onto her chair, knees on the seat to get a better look. "Sure did, Princess." Daniel set the plate in front of her, watching as she traced the Mickey ears with her fork. The peeling wallpaper behind her showed water stains from last month's leak, and a stack of bills on the counter caught his eye, each one marked in red. But none of that mattered when he saw Lily's smile. "Aren't you having any?" Lily asked, already drizzling syrup over her breakfast. Daniel patted his stomach. "Already ate while I was cooking." The lie came easily. He'd learned to ignore his own hunger pangs long ago. The grocery money had to stretch until next payday, and Lily's needs always came first. He sat across from her, sipping black coffee, the cheapest brand from the discount store. Their small kitchen table wobbled slightly, fixed with a folded piece of cardboard under one leg. But the morning sunlight streaming through the window made everything look warmer, softer somehow. "Tell me about your dreams last night," Daniel said, their morning ritual beginning as it always did. Lily launched into a story about flying horses and rainbow clouds, her hands gesturing excitedly. Daniel nodded and gasped at all the right moments, treasuring how her face lit up as she spoke. These moments made everything worth it. The late nights fixing cars in neighbors' driveways, the weekends painting houses, the endless scramble for enough work to keep their little world turning. After breakfast, Daniel helped Lily get ready for school. He braided her hair the way he'd learned from YouTube videos, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate strands. The elastic band was fraying, he'd have to pick up new ones soon. "Perfect," he said, though the braid was slightly crooked. Lily beamed at her reflection. "You're getting better, Daddy." She hugged him tight around the middle. Daniel's throat tightened as he hugged her back. Her school uniform was getting too short. Another expense he'd have to figure out soon. But for now, he focused on the warmth of her small arms around him, the complete trust in her embrace. As they walked to school, Lily skipped beside him, telling him about the book report she had to present today. Daniel listened intently, asking questions about the characters and plot. His daughter was smart. Teacher said she was reading 2 grades above her level. Pride swelled in his chest, even as worry gnawed at him about affording the books she loved so much. "And then the princess saved herself," Lily concluded, jumping over a crack in the sidewalk. "Sounds like a brave princess," Daniel said, steadying her with a gentle hand. "Just like you." The morning routine continued after school drop-off. Daniel headed to his first job of the day, stocking shelves at the local hardware store. His boss let him work flexible hours around Lily's school schedule, though the pay barely covered their basic needs. During his lunch break, he called about a painting job for the weekend. Every extra dollar helped. When afternoon came, Daniel waited outside the school gates, checking his watch. Other parents arrived in shiny SUVs and new sedans, but he stood tall in his work-worn jeans and faded army jacket. The school bell rang, and children poured out into the yard. Lily emerged from the crowd, her face breaking into a wide smile when she spotted him. She ran straight into his arms, and Daniel lifted her up, ignoring the twinge in his back from the morning's heavy lifting. "Daddy, I got an A on my book report." She waved the paper proudly. "That's my girl." Daniel set her down gently, taking her small hand in his. "How about we put this on the fridge when we get home?" Their evening ritual was Daniel's favorite part of the day. After a simple dinner of mac and cheese, Lily's favorite, they sat together on her bed. a worn Bible open between them. Daniel had carried it through 2 tours of duty, and now its pages helped him guide his daughter. "Dear God," Lily began, her hands clasped tightly. "Thank you for my daddy, and for Mickey Mouse pancakes, and for helping me with my book report." Daniel closed his eyes, adding his own silent prayers. For strength, for guidance, for the ability to keep providing for his little girl. When Lily finished, he tucked her in, making sure her favorite stuffed rabbit was secure in her arms. "Love you to the moon and back," he whispered, their nightly words. "And to the stars and home again," Lily finished sleepily. Walking home from school the next afternoon, Lily swung their joined hands back and forth, chattering about her day. Daniel listened, content in their simple happiness. But then he felt Lily's hand tighten in his. Looking up, he saw Jacob Whitmore leaning against his expensive sports car across the street. The judge's son stood there in his designer clothes, sunglasses pushed up on his head. His eyes followed Lily's movement with an intensity that made Daniel's combat-trained instincts flare to life. He pulled Lily closer to his side, feeling her small form press against him. Jacob's stare lingered, a small smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Daniel fought the urge to confront him, knowing any conflict with the judge's son would only bring trouble. Instead, he guided Lily forward, his body angled between her and Jacob's watchful gaze. The evening shadows lengthened across Lily's small bedroom as Daniel tucked the worn patchwork quilt around her shoulders. Her favorite stuffed bear sat faithfully beside her pillow, but tonight she wasn't reaching for it. Instead, her tiny fingers twisted anxiously in the fabric of her doll's dress, her usual bedtime smile absent. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, the old springs creaking beneath his weight. The dim glow of her nightlight cast soft shadows on her troubled face. Lily's lower lip trembled. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. "Mr. Jacob tried to talk to me today." Daniel's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression calm. "What do you mean, baby? When did this happen?" "At recess." Lily's fingers gripped the doll tighter. "He was by the fence. He said he had candy in his car." She looked up at her father with wide eyes. "I didn't go, Daddy. I remembered what you said about strangers." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he forced a gentle smile. "You did exactly right, Lily." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I'm very proud of you for being so smart." "He's not really a stranger, though, is he?" Lily's voice wavered. "He's the judge's son. Miss Martinez says we should respect the judge." "Listen to me, sweetie." Daniel took her small hand in his. "Even people we know can sometimes do wrong things. You trust your heart, okay? If something doesn't feel right, you come straight to me." Lily nodded, but her eyes still held worry. Daniel led her through their nightly prayer, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. That night, sleep was slow to come for both of them. The next morning dawned gray and cool. Daniel walked Lily to school as usual, their joined hands swinging between them. He'd packed her favorite lunch, peanut butter and honey sandwich with apple slices, trying to bring back her smile. As they approached the school gates, he knelt down to her level. "Remember what we talked about? You stay with your teachers, okay?" "Yes, Daddy." She hugged him tight before joining the stream of children heading inside. Daniel's warehouse shift ended early that afternoon, a blessing in disguise. As he approached the school, his military-trained instincts flared at the sight before him. There was Jacob Whitmore, his expensive car parked illegally close to the school entrance, leaning against the chain-link fence, and there was Lily, backed against the metal links, clutching her backpack like a shield. Daniel's legs ate up the distance in long strides. He could hear Jacob's smooth voice. "Come on, sweetheart, your daddy won't mind if I give you a ride. Step away from my daughter." Daniel's voice cut through the air like steel. Jacob straightened slowly, a practiced smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Carter, I was just offering to help little Lily here get home safely. Dangerous neighborhood and all. She has me for that." Daniel positioned himself between Jacob and his daughter, feeling Lily's small hands grip the back of his jacket. "And you know better than to approach a child without their parent present." "Do I?" Jacob's smile turned to a smirk. "My father's the judge, Mr. Carter. I know exactly what I can and can't do in this town." He adjusted his designer watch with deliberate slowness. "Question is, do you?" Daniel's combat training screamed at him to neutralize the threat, but he remained still, his voice low and controlled. "Last warning. Stay away from my daughter." "Or what?" Jacob's eyes glittered with challenge. "Going to file a complaint? Tell my father? Good luck with that, old man." He pushed off from the fence and sauntered to his car, calling over his shoulder, "See you around, little Lily." Daniel waited until Jacob's car disappeared around the corner before turning to gather Lily in his arms. She was trembling. "It's okay, baby. I've got you. I've got you." That night, Daniel knelt beside Lily's bed, their nightly prayers taking on new urgency. "Dear God," he whispered, his calloused hand enveloping her small one, "please give me the strength to protect my little girl. Guide us through whatever lies ahead. Keep her safe when I cannot be there. And please help Daddy," Lily added softly, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "He works so hard." Daniel's throat tightened as he watched his daughter drift off, her fingers still wrapped trustingly in his. Her face looked so peaceful now, the worry from earlier erased by sleep and the security of her father's presence. The moonlight filtered through her window, casting a gentle glow on her features, so innocent and vulnerable. He stayed there, kneeling beside her bed, his hand still holding hers, drawing strength from her touch just as she drew comfort from his. In the quiet of the room, he continued his silent prayer, asking not for himself, but for the wisdom and courage to be the father Lily needed him to be. The ancient floorboards creaked softly under his knees, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded, but in this moment, in this room, there was only the sound of Lily's steady breathing, and the weight of a father's love standing guard against the darkness. The wood-paneled courtroom felt suffocating as Daniel Carter sat rigid in his chair, his worn suit jacket feeling too tight across his shoulders. His calloused fingers drummed silently against his thigh, a nervous habit from his military days. The morning light filtering through the tall windows cast long shadows across the floor, making the room feel even more imposing. Judge Whitmore's presence dominated the courtroom from his elevated bench, his steel-gray hair and piercing eyes projecting authority. The judge's gavel rested before him like a weapon, ready to pronounce judgment on Daniel's future and, more importantly, on Lily's. Daniel's court-appointed lawyer shuffled papers beside him, but Daniel barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the small door to the side of the courtroom where Lily would enter. The custody hearing had dragged on for weeks, ever since his ex-wife had abandoned them 6 months ago, leaving nothing but a hastily scribbled note and empty closets behind. "The court calls Lily Carter to the stand," Judge Whitmore's voice boomed through the room. Daniel's heart clenched as the door opened and Lily appeared, looking tiny in her best blue dress, the one they'd found at the church donation box. Her brown hair was neatly braided, the ends tied with white ribbons that Daniel had learned to tie after watching countless YouTube tutorials. She walked carefully, her small patent leather shoes clicking against the floor. The social worker guided Lily to the witness stand, helping her climb onto the chair that seemed to swallow her small frame. Daniel wanted to run to her, to scoop her up and shield her from all of this, but he remained frozen in place. "Now, Lily," the social worker spoke gently, adjusting the microphone. "Do you understand why you're here today?" Lily nodded, then remembered to speak aloud. "Yes, ma'am. To tell the truth about everything." From his seat, Daniel could see Jacob Whitmore lounging in the back row of the courtroom, his expensive suit and confident smirk a stark contrast to Daniel's threadbare appearance. The sight of him made Daniel's stomach turn. The questioning began softly, standard procedures about Lily's home life, her school, her relationship with her father. Lily answered clearly, her voice small but steady. Daniel felt a surge of pride at her composure, even as his own hands trembled with anxiety. "And do you feel safe at home with your daddy?" the social worker asked. "Yes, ma'am," Lily replied without hesitation. "Daddy always takes care of me. He makes me breakfast every morning and reads me stories and—" Her voice suddenly trailed off, her eyes fixing on something, or someone, in the courtroom. The change in her demeanor was instant and visible. Her small shoulders tensed, and her fingers gripped the edge of the witness stand. "Lily?" the social worker prompted gently. "Is everything okay?" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lily's arm rose, her finger pointing directly across the courtroom. Daniel followed her gesture, his heart stopping when he realized she was pointing straight at Jacob Whitmore. "My daddy saved me from you," Lily's voice rang out, clear and trembling with emotion. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face as the full impact of Lily's words hit him. Judge Whitmore's gavel crashed down, but even its sharp crack couldn't fully silence the wave of whispers that swept through the room. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Whitmore's voice carried a new edge, something beyond his usual authority. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting between his son and the little girl on the stand. Jacob's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of calculated anger. He half rose from his seat, but his lawyer grabbed his arm, pulling him back down. Daniel's lawyer leaned forward, suddenly alert. The social worker stood frozen beside Lily, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. But Daniel could only focus on his daughter, his brave, beautiful little girl who had finally spoken the truth he'd been fighting to prove. Lily's eyes found his across the courtroom, seeking reassurance. Daniel managed to give her a small nod, trying to convey all his love and pride in that simple gesture. She sat up straighter, her chin lifting slightly. "Young lady," Judge Whitmore's voice was strained as he addressed Lily, "that is a very serious accusation. Do you understand what you're saying?" "Yes, sir," Lily replied, her voice smaller but still clear. "Mr. Jacob tried to hurt me at the playground, but my daddy saw him and stopped him. Daddy pulled me away and told him never to come near me again." Another wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Daniel could see people turning to stare at Jacob, who was now leaning close to his lawyer, speaking in urgent whispers. The social worker had recovered her composure and stepped forward. "Your Honor, in light of these allegations..." "Daddy?" Lily's voice cut through the tension, her eyes still locked on Daniel. "Yes, baby?" Daniel answered automatically, not caring about courtroom protocol. "I'm sorry I didn't tell before. I was scared." Her lower lip trembled slightly. "But you always say we have to tell the truth, even when it's hard." Daniel felt tears pricking at his eyes. Rising from his chair, he moved toward the witness stand, no longer able to maintain his distance. No one tried to stop him as he reached for his daughter, lifting her small form from the chair and holding her close. Lily's arms wrapped around his neck, and he could feel her trembling slightly against him. The courtroom seemed to fade away as he held her, this precious child who had found the courage to speak when he had felt powerless. "You did so good, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. So good." For a brief, shining moment, hope bloomed in Daniel's chest. The truth was finally out, spoken from the innocent lips of his 8-year-old daughter. The whispers continued to ripple through the courtroom like waves, but Daniel barely heard them. He just held Lily tighter, feeling her small heart beating against his chest, knowing that whatever came next, she had been brave enough to speak the truth. The sharp crack of Judge Whitmore's gavel shattered the stunned silence. "This court will take a 15-minute recess." His voice carried the practiced steadiness of decades on the bench, but the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him as he set the gavel down. Daniel watched the judge rise swiftly, his black robes swishing as he disappeared through the door behind the bench. The courtroom erupted into hushed whispers, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice quavered beside him. Her blue dress, the one they'd bought special for court at the discount store, crinkled as she pressed closer to his side. "It's okay, sweetheart." Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Everything had changed in that single moment, when his daughter's trembling finger had pointed at Jacob Whitmore. Their court-appointed attorney, Mike Barnes, leaned in close. His drugstore cologne couldn't mask the smell of coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "Daniel, we need to talk. Now." "Stay with Miss Maria," Daniel told Lily, nodding toward her teacher who sat 2 rows back. The young woman immediately moved forward to take his place beside Lily. Barnes led Daniel to a corner of the courtroom, his worn briefcase clutched tight against his chest like a shield. This just got real complicated, real fast. He kept his voice low, eyes darting to where Jacob Whitmore sat with his expensive lawyer, both of them typing furiously on their phones. "She told the truth," Daniel said firmly. "That's what matters." Barnes ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Truth? Daniel, you don't understand. This is Judge Whitmore's son we're talking about. The same judge who's deciding your custody case. The same family that practically owns this town. So what? We just pretend it didn't happen?" Daniel's military training kept his voice steady, but anger burned in his chest. "Listen to me carefully." Barnes gripped Daniel's arm. "They're going to bury this. The system protects its own. Without hard evidence, it'll be your daughter's word against his. And they'll make sure her testimony gets thrown out." The 15 minutes passed like a death march. When Judge Whitmore returned, his face had hardened into granite. He settled into his chair with deliberate movements, arranging his robes just so, while the bailiff called everyone to order. "In light of the unexpected testimony," Judge Whitmore began, each word measured and precise, "this court must address several procedural matters." He shuffled papers before him, though Daniel suspected it was just for show. The alleged incident was not part of the original custody filing. No formal charges were ever filed. No evidence has been presented to substantiate these serious claims. Daniel's hands clenched into fists under the table. Across the aisle, Jacob Whitmore's face wore a slight smirk. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I have no choice but to rule this testimony inadmissible. It will be stricken from the record." The gavel fell again, the sound like a gunshot in Daniel's ears. "Your Honor, we request time to gather evidence." Barnes started to rise. "Denied." Judge Whitmore's voice could have frozen hell itself. "This is a custody hearing, Counselor, not a criminal trial. We will proceed with the matters at hand." He fixed Daniel with a stare that carried clear warning. "Unless any party wishes to withdraw their petition?" Daniel felt the weight of that stare, felt the machine of power grinding into motion against him. But he thought of Lily's tears, of her trembling voice speaking truth to power, and his spine straightened. "No, Your Honor, we do not withdraw." The rest of the hearing passed in a blur of legal terms and procedural maneuvers. Barnes tried his best, but Daniel could see his heart wasn't in it anymore. The attorney's earlier warnings echoed in his head. The system protects its own. When they finally left the courthouse, the late afternoon sun felt too bright, too cheerful for such a dark day. Lily's small hand clutched his as they walked to their old pickup truck, her steps dragging. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered once they were inside. "I thought if I told them—" "No, baby." Daniel pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "You did exactly right. You were so brave in there. But the judge didn't believe me." Her voice cracked, and tears began rolling down her cheeks. They drove home in silence, the truck's engine protesting every mile. Their small rental house looked even more worn than usual, with its patched roof and crooked mailbox. But it was home. And right now, that's what they needed. Inside, Lily's tears came in earnest. Daniel scooped her up like he used to when she was smaller, carrying her to the threadbare couch. She curled against his chest, her small body shaking with sobs. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" she hiccuped between tears. "No." Daniel's voice was firm, certain. He shifted so he could look into her eyes, still bright with tears. "Listen to me, Lily. I promise you I won't let them silence you. We're going to fight this together." "But how?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The judge said." "The judge isn't God, sweetheart." Daniel smoothed her hair back from her face. "Remember what we always say? The truth is like light. You can try to cover it up, but it always finds a way to shine through." Lily's fingers found the small wooden cross she wore, a gift from Daniel on her last birthday. "Can we pray about it?" "Of course we can." Daniel held her close, their heads bowed together. In that moment, despite the weight pressing down on them, despite the power aligned against them, he felt a fierce determination rise in his chest. They might have money and influence on their side, but he had something stronger, a father's love and a daughter's truth. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Walker's auto shop, casting long shadows across the oil-stained concrete floor. Daniel Carter wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a dark smudge as he bent over the engine of Mrs. Peterson's old Buick. The familiar smell of motor oil and grease couldn't mask the tension in the air. 2 customers stood near the shop's entrance, their hushed voices carrying across the space. "That's him, the one fighting Judge Whitmore," one whispered. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the engine, pretending not to hear. "Poor man," the other replied. "Going up against the judge? He doesn't stand a chance." Some folks walked straight past him to talk to other mechanics. Others, like old Mr. Thompson, who'd known Daniel since he was a boy, made a point of choosing him. "Always trusted a military man to do right by my truck, Mr. Thompson said loudly enough for everyone to hear, handing Daniel his keys with a firm handshake. Around noon, while Daniel was cleaning his tools, a familiar face appeared at the garage entrance. Maria Lopez, Lily's third-grade teacher, stood there clutching her purse, her dark eyes serious beneath her neat bangs. "Mr. Carter? Could I speak with you for a moment?" Daniel nodded, leading her to the small break room in the back. The space was hardly bigger than a closet, with a rickety table and 2 plastic chairs. A coffee maker that had seen better days sputtered in the corner. "I've been wanting to talk to you," Maria said, settling into one of the chairs. Her voice was gentle but firm. "About Lily." Daniel's hands tensed on his coffee cup. "Is she having trouble at school?" No, Maria quickly assured him. "Lily's one of my best students. But—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've noticed things. Bruises on her arms. Times when she's been different. Withdrawn." Daniel's throat tightened. He'd seen those bruises too, appearing after days when Jacob had been lurking near the school. "I want to help," Maria continued. "I've documented everything I've observed. Dates, descriptions. I know it might not be much, but maybe it could help support Lily's testimony." Before Daniel could respond, a shadow fell across the break room door. Pastor John Miller stood there, his weathered face solemn beneath his white hair. "Mind if I join you?" the pastor asked, easing his tall frame into the remaining chair. "I couldn't help overhauling what Miss Lopez was saying, and I think it's time I spoke up too." The old pastor's hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table. 20 years ago, the judge's family, they had me silence someone else. Another child. I've carried that shame ever since. His voice cracked. "I won't make that mistake again." Daniel looked between them, the kind-hearted teacher and the repentant pastor, feeling a spark of hope he hadn't dared acknowledge before. Throughout the afternoon, more people stopped by the shop. Mrs. Wilson from the diner slipped him a paper bag with a hot lunch inside. "On the house?" she whispered. "Stay strong." Even Tommy Fletcher, the town's mailman, lingered to share what he'd seen of Jacob's suspicious behavior around the school. The day's work finally done, Daniel drove home in his beaten-up pickup truck, his mind swimming with everything that had happened. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as he pulled into the cracked driveway of their small rental house. Inside, he set about making dinner with what little they had. A pot of pinto beans he'd soaked that morning and a pan of cornbread made from the last of the mix. The kitchen was warm from the oven, and the familiar smell of baking bread filled the air. Lily sat at their small kitchen table, her homework spread out before her. Dark circles shadowed her young eyes, making her look older than her 8 years. She watched as Daniel stirred the beans one last time and cut the cornbread into squares. "Smells good, Daddy," she said softly, though they both knew it was the same meal they'd had 3 times that week. They joined hands over their simple dinner, saying grace as they always did. When Daniel opened his eyes, he found Lily looking at him intently across their scratched wooden table. "Don't give up, Daddy," she said, her small voice full of a strength that made his heart ache. He reached across the table and squeezed her tiny hand. "Not ever, baby girl, not ever." The beans might have been plain and the cornbread a little dry, but somehow it was exactly what they needed. They ate together in the gentle quiet of their kitchen, father and daughter against the world, but no longer quite so alone. The early morning air was crisp and quiet when Daniel stepped onto his worn front porch to retrieve the morning paper. His boots crunched on something, a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under his door during the night. His heart skipped a beat as he unfolded it, reading the crude blocked letters. "Drop this, or lose her." His hands trembled as he crumpled the note. Inside, he could hear Lily humming as she got ready for school, innocent and unaware. The sound of her sweet voice made his chest tighten. He quickly stuffed the threatening note into his jacket pocket before going back inside. "Ready for breakfast, sweetheart?" Daniel called out, working to keep his voice steady. "Coming, Daddy!" Lily bounded into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing. Her smile faltered when she saw his face. "Are you okay?" Daniel forced a smile. "Just tired, baby girl." He set a bowl of cereal in front of her, watching as she dug in hungrily. The morning sun caught her hair, making it shine like honey. His precious daughter. The thought of anything happening to her made him feel physically ill. Throughout breakfast, his mind raced. Should he back down? The threat was clear. But looking at Lily, seeing the trust in her eyes when she glanced up at him between spoonfuls, he knew he couldn't. Backing down would teach her that bullies win, that speaking the truth didn't matter. No, he had to keep fighting. But he'd need to be smarter, more careful. "Time for school," he said, helping her with her jacket. As they walked, Daniel kept Lily close, scanning every car and shadow. The threatening note felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. At the school entrance, Maria Lopez was waiting. Her usually warm face was drawn with concern as she approached them. "Mr. Carter, could I speak with you for a moment?" She glanced meaningfully at Lily. "Sweetie, why don't you head to class? Mrs. Johnson has some new books she wants to show you." Once Lily was out of earshot, Maria's voice dropped low. "I need to tell you something. Jacob's friends. They've been hanging around during recess. Yesterday, they were pointing at Lily, laughing. She tried to hide behind the slide." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Did they approach her?" "No, but—" Maria wrung her hands. "She's scared, Mr. Carter. I can see it. She's not playing with the other children anymore. Just sits alone, drawing in her notebook. I'll talk to the principal." "I already tried." Maria shook her head. "One of the boys is the superintendent's nephew. They say, without proof of actual harassment, they can't ban them from public property." Daniel ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble there. "Thank you for telling me, Miss Lopez, and thank you for watching out for her." "Of course." Maria touched his arm gently. "Mr. Carter, be careful. These people, they're used to getting their way." Throughout the day, Daniel could barely focus on his work at the auto shop. Oil changes and tire rotations passed in a blur as he watched the clock, counting the minutes until he could pick up Lily. The crumpled threat in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. When the final school bell rang, Daniel was already waiting outside. Lily emerged from the building, head down, clutching her backpack straps. His heart ached at how small she looked. "Hey, sunshine!" he called out, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" They were halfway home when Daniel heard it, the low rumble of an expensive engine. A black BMW cruised past them, moving slowly. Behind the wheel, Jacob Whitmore's smirk was visible through the tinted windows. Lily pressed herself against Daniel's side, trying to make herself invisible. Daniel's fists clenched involuntarily. The urge to protect, to fight, surged through him, the same instinct he'd felt in combat. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his daughter's life, her future. He had to be smart about this. He wrapped his arm tighter around Lily's shoulders as the BMW disappeared around the corner, its engine noise fading into the afternoon quiet. The message was clear. They were being watched. They were being threatened. But looking down at Lily's trusting face, Daniel knew he couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The truth had to matter more than power. Justice had to mean something, if not for Lily, then for all the other children who might face the same darkness. He squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. "How about we stop for ice cream on the way home?" Her face brightened slightly. "Can I get sprinkles?" "Extra sprinkles," Daniel promised, guiding her toward the small ice cream shop on the corner. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The note in his pocket wouldn't silence them. The smirking face in the BMW wouldn't break them. His little girl had found the courage to speak the truth. Now it was his turn to show the same courage in standing beside her, no matter the cost. The Sunday morning sun painted golden streaks across the church's wooden pews as Daniel and Lily walked into the small sanctuary. The familiar scent of old hymnals and polished wood wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Lily's patent leather shoes clicked softly against the floor as she held tight to her daddy's hand, her favorite blue dress swishing around her knees. Daniel nodded to familiar faces, some offering gentle smiles while others quickly looked away. The divide in the community had never felt more obvious than in these sacred walls. Still, he guided Lily to their usual spot. Third pew from the front, right side. Pastor Miller stood at the pulpit, his weathered face kind but determined. His silver hair caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows, creating a sort of halo effect that made Lily whisper, "Daddy, Pastor looks like an angel today." Daniel squeezed her hand and smiled, helping her find the right page in the hymnal as the organ started to play. The congregation rose, and their voices filled the church with "Amazing Grace." Daniel's deep baritone joined in, and Lily's sweet, clear voice rose beside him. When Pastor Miller began his sermon, his eyes seemed to find Daniel's more than once. "Today, we're going to talk about David and Goliath," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "Sometimes God puts giants in our path, not to destroy us, but to show us how strong we can be when we stand up for what's right." Daniel felt Lily lean against him as she listened. The pastor's words seemed to speak directly to their situation, each carefully chosen phrase landing like arrows of truth. "David wasn't the biggest or the strongest," Pastor Miller continued, his voice growing stronger. "He didn't have fancy armor or powerful friends, but he had something more important. He had truth on his side, and he had faith that God would help him face his giant." The sermon continued, weaving between ancient truth and present-day application. Daniel felt something building in his chest, not anger or fear, but a steady kind of strength he hadn't felt in days. He glanced down at Lily, who was drawing on her church bulletin with a stubby pencil, and knew that, like David, he would face any giant to protect what mattered most. After the final hymn, as people began filing out, Pastor Miller caught Daniel's eye and gave a subtle nod toward his office. "Lily," Daniel said softly, "why don't you go say hi to Mrs. Peterson? She always has those peppermint candies you like." Lily skipped over to the elderly woman while Daniel made his way to the pastor's office. The small room was lined with books, and a worn leather chair sat across from the pastor's desk. Pastor Miller closed the door behind them, his movements deliberate and heavy with purpose. "Sit down, son," he said, lowering himself into his chair with a slight groan. "There's something I need to tell you." Daniel settled into the leather chair, noting how the pastor's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his reading glasses. 20 years ago," Pastor Miller began, his voice barely above a whisper, "Judge Whitmore's family came to me with a situation. His older son, Jacob's brother, had done something terrible to a young girl in the youth group. The pastor's eyes grew distant with pain. They asked me to handle it quietly, to protect the family name, to protect the church's reputation." Daniel leaned forward, his heart pounding. The pastor's voice cracked as he continued, "I did what they asked. I helped move the girl's family to another church. I kept quiet, and not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted my silence." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "I've carried that shame for 2 decades, Daniel. Watching history repeat itself with your Lily. I can't stay silent again. I won't." Daniel's throat felt tight. "What are you saying, Pastor?" "I'm saying, I'll testify. I'll tell the court about the pattern, about the pressure to keep quiet. It might not be direct evidence about Lily's case, but it shows a history." The pastor's voice grew stronger. "I'm an old man, Daniel. I don't have many years left to make things right. But this I can do." Before Daniel could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Lily poked her head in, her cheeks pink from the peppermint candy. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson says she has some cookies for us to take home." "Be right there, sweetheart," Daniel called, standing up. The pastor rose too, placing a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "The truth sets us free," Pastor Miller said quietly. "All of us." Later that afternoon, back in their small kitchen, Lily hunched over the kitchen table with her crayons spread out around her. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as she worked on her drawing. Daniel watched her while washing the few dishes they'd used for lunch, amazed at how she could still find joy in simple things despite everything happening around them. "Done," Lily announced triumphantly, holding up her picture. She'd drawn 2 figures holding hands, one tall with brown hair, one small with yellow pigtails. Above them, she'd colored a brilliant yellow sun with orange rays stretching across the blue paper. Little hearts floated around the figures, and at the bottom, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "Me and Daddy forever." Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel as Lily ran to the refrigerator. She stood on tiptoe, reaching up to pin her artwork with a magnet shaped like a butterfly, a yard sale find from happier days. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "Now we can see it every day and remember that we're together." Daniel knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight hug. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, and she smelled of peppermint and church cookies. The drawing hung bright and hopeful on their tired old fridge, a splash of color against the worn white surface. It was more than just a child's artwork. It was a declaration of love, of trust, of hope for their future together. Lily pulled back from the hug and touched the picture gently. "The sun is extra big," she explained seriously, "because that's how much I love you, Daddy." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elementary school playground as Daniel waited by the chain-link fence. His work boots were still dusty from his morning shift at the construction site, and his shoulders ached from hauling lumber all day. But none of that mattered when he saw Lily bounce out of the building, her backpack swaying with each step. Maria Lopez walked beside his daughter, her gentle hand guiding Lily through the after-school crowd. When they reached Daniel, Maria's usually warm expression was serious. "Mr. Carter, could you come to my classroom? There's something important we need to discuss." Daniel's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his voice steady for Lily's sake. "Of course, Miss Lopez." They followed Maria through the emptying hallways, past artwork-decorated walls and rows of lockers. Her classroom was at the end of the hall, bright with afternoon light and decorated with student projects. The smell of chalk and crayons filled the air. "Lily, sweetheart," Maria said softly, "would you mind working on your reading at my desk while I talk to your father?" Lily nodded, settling into Maria's chair with her favorite book. Daniel watched his daughter for a moment, grateful for her resilience, before following Maria to the back of the classroom. Maria pulled out a manila folder from her desk drawer, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been documenting everything, Mr. Carter." She spread several papers across a student desk. "These are dated photographs of the bruises I noticed on Lily's arms. 3 separate incidents." Daniel's throat tightened as he looked at the time-stamped photos. Each showed distinct finger-shaped marks on his daughter's small arms. His fists clenched involuntarily. "But there's more," Maria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Lily to make sure she was absorbed in her book. "Last week, I requested the security camera footage from the school's exterior cameras. I had a feeling." She pulled out her phone and pressed play on a video. The grainy footage showed the school's side entrance. Daniel's heart stopped as he watched Jacob Whitmore approach Lily during recess. Even without audio, the interaction was clearly threatening. Jacob looming over her, Lily backing away until she hit the wall. The timestamp matched the day before Lily's courtroom revelation. "There's more footage from different days," Maria said, swiping through several clips. "I've downloaded everything and made copies." Daniel had to grip the desk to steady himself. Here it was. Actual evidence. Proof that could make people believe Lily. "Miss Lopez. Maria. I don't know how to thank you." Maria shook her head, her dark eyes fierce with determination. "Don't thank me. This is what's right. I've seen too many children failed by adults who should have protected them." She gathered the papers and handed him the folder. "I've already spoken with my principal. I'm willing to testify about what I've documented." Across the room, Lily looked up from her book, sensing the charged atmosphere. Daniel managed a reassuring smile for her before turning back to Maria. "Why?" he asked softly. "You could lose your job over this. The Whitmores, they have influence in this town." Maria straightened her shoulders. "Because every child deserves to be heard. Because Lily is brave enough to speak the truth, and we need to be brave enough to stand with her." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. This was more than evidence, it was hope, wrapped in manila paper and held together with paper clips. "We should move quickly," Maria advised, keeping her voice low. "I've made multiple copies and stored them in different locations. We can't risk this disappearing." "I'll call my lawyer tonight," Daniel said, carefully tucking the precious folder into his work bag. "Thank you. Doesn't seem enough, but thank you." Lily looked up as they approached her. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." He helped her pack up her book, noticing how she seemed lighter somehow, as if she could sense the shift in the air. Maria walked them to the door. "Take care, Lily," she said, giving the girl a warm smile. "I'll see you tomorrow." The walk home was different than usual. Lily skipped beside Daniel, humming a tune from music class. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like he could breathe properly. At home, they went through their evening routine. Homework, a simple dinner of spaghetti, and then bath time. As Daniel tucked Lily into bed, her damp hair forming dark spots on her pillow, she looked more peaceful than she had in weeks. "Ready for prayers?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Lily nodded, clasping her small hands together. They said their usual prayers, but tonight Daniel added a special thank you for brave teachers who helped tell the truth. "We're getting closer, sweetheart," he whispered as he kissed her forehead. Lily's eyes were already heavy with sleep, but a small smile played on her lips. The first real smile he'd seen in weeks. She drifted off, still wearing that smile, clutching her stuffed rabbit close. Daniel sat there for a moment longer, watching her sleep, the folder of evidence secure in his work bag by the door. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, hope had found its way back into their little home. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Mr. Peterson's law office, casting thin stripes across the worn carpet. Daniel sat straight-backed in a creaky leather chair, his work-roughened hands clasped tightly in his lap. Next to him, Maria Lopez smoothed her modest skirt, her kind face set with determination. Their lawyer, Tom Peterson, adjusted his reading glasses as he studied the documents spread across his desk. The security footage from the school lay like a precious gem among the scattered papers. His eyes widened as he reviewed Maria's detailed notes about the bruises she'd documented on Lily. "This," Tom looked up, a spark of hope lighting his tired eyes. "This is exactly what we needed, Daniel. Miss Lopez, your documentation is meticulous." Maria nodded quietly. "I've been keeping records since I first noticed something was wrong. The dates, times, everything." Daniel's throat felt tight. "Will it be enough?" "More than enough," Tom said, shuffling the papers into a neat stack. "The security footage alone is compelling, but combined with Miss Lopez's observations and documentation." He smiled, the first real smile Daniel had seen from him in weeks. "This puts us in a strong position. When can we present it?" Daniel leaned forward, hope making his heart race. Tom checked his calendar. "I can file the motion today. We should be able to get a hearing scheduled for next week." He scribbled some notes. "The judge will have to recuse himself now. There's no way around it with this evidence." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer of thanks. When he opened them, Maria was watching him with gentle understanding. "You've been so brave," she said softly. "Both you and Lily." "I couldn't have done this without your help," Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you." Back home, Daniel's small house seemed brighter somehow. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, making even the worn furniture look warmer. In the kitchen, he pulled out the ingredients for his mother's old stew recipe, something he saved for special occasions. Lily sat at the kitchen table, working on her homework, while Daniel chopped vegetables. The familiar rhythm of the knife against the cutting board felt soothing. "Daddy?" Lily looked up from her math problems. "Miss Lopez really helped us, didn't she?" Daniel smiled, adding carrots to the pot. "She sure did, sweetheart. Sometimes God sends us angels in disguise. Like in my Sunday school stories? Exactly like that." The stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with rich, homey smells. Daniel taught Lily how to make cornbread, just like his mama had taught him. Her small hands carefully measured the ingredients, her face scrunched in concentration. "Am I doing it right?" she asked, stirring the batter. "Perfect," Daniel assured her, dropping a kiss on top of her head. For the first time in weeks, real laughter echoed through their home. They set the table together, using the good plates, the ones that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. Lily arranged the napkins carefully, humming a song she'd learned in music class. The stew turned out just right, thick and hearty. Daniel watched Lily take her first bite, her face lighting up with pleasure. "It tastes like love," she declared, making Daniel chuckle. "That's what Grandma always used to say about cooking," he said, breaking off a piece of warm cornbread. "She said, if you cook with love in your heart, everyone can taste it." After dinner, they moved out to the small front porch. The evening air was soft and cool, carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle from Mrs. Johnson's fence next door. Daniel settled into the old rocking chair, and Lily curled up on his lap, just like she used to when she was smaller. Above them, stars began to appear in the deepening twilight. They played their old game of finding shapes in the constellations, with Lily pointing out a cat, a flower, and what she swore was an ice cream cone. The night was peaceful, broken only by the gentle creaking of the rocking chair and the distant chirp of crickets. Daniel felt Lily relax against him, her small body warm and trusting. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Yes, baby? Maybe tomorrow will be better." Daniel hugged her closer, his heart full of love for his brave little girl. The stars twinkled above them, silent witnesses to their moment of peace. Maria Lopez carefully placed the manila envelope containing the security footage in her glove compartment. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot as she locked her modest Honda. She'd make one quick stop at Green's Grocery before heading home to prepare everything for tomorrow's crucial court hearing. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she grabbed a few essentials: bread, milk, and some fruit for her morning breakfast. Her mind wandered to Daniel and little Lily, hoping this evidence would finally bring them justice. The cashier's cheerful, "Have a nice evening," barely registered as she hurried back to her car, eager to get home and organize her testimony. But something felt wrong the moment she approached her vehicle. The passenger window looked slightly different in the fading light. Thousands of tiny glass fragments sparkled on the asphalt like cruel diamonds. Maria's heart began to race as she rushed to her car. The glove compartment hung open, empty. No, no, no. Her trembling hands searched frantically through the scattered papers and old receipts. The manila envelope was gone. Every scrap of evidence, the footage, her careful documentation, everything, had vanished. She fumbled for her phone, dialing Daniel's number with shaking fingers. No answer. Panic rose in her throat as she tried again. Still, nothing. The evening air grew thick and heavy around her as she realized what this meant. Across town, Daniel Carter was just finishing dinner with Lily. They sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a modest meal of spaghetti. Lily twirled the pasta on her fork, giggling as she told her father about her day at school. "And then Jenny said her hamster—" Lily's voice cut off at the sound of heavy knocking. Daniel rose slowly, his military instincts suddenly alert. Through the window, he caught the glint of police lights painting their front yard in alternating red and blue. His heart sank. "Stay here, sweetheart," he said softly, squeezing Lily's shoulder as he passed. The knocking came again, more insistent. Daniel opened the door to find 2 police officers on his porch, their expressions grim. "Daniel Carter?" the taller officer asked. Though they all knew who he was in their small town. "Yes, sir. You're under arrest for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice." The words hit him like physical blows. Behind him, he heard Lily's chair scrape against the floor as she ran to the door. "Daddy? It's okay, baby," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his chest. "Everything's going to be okay." The officers moved forward with their handcuffs as curious neighbors began emerging onto their porches. The Henderson family across the street stood frozen on their lawn, their evening walk forgotten. Mrs. Thompson next door pressed her hand to her mouth in shock. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began reciting as he secured the cuffs around Daniel's wrists. "No!" Lily's scream pierced the evening air. "Don't take my daddy, please." She tried to run forward, but the second officer gently blocked her path. "Someone needs to call child services," the first officer said into his radio. "We have a minor, requiring temporary placement." Daniel's heart shattered. "Please," he said quietly, "let me call my sister. She can take Lily." The thought of his daughter in the system, even temporarily, was unbearable. "Daddy!" Lily's cries grew more desperate as she tried to push past the officer. "Don't leave me!" "I love you, baby girl," Daniel called back, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Be brave for me. Pray, like we always do." The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the officers led Daniel to their patrol car. Some filmed with their phones, others whispered behind their hands. The evening air filled with Lily's heartbreaking sobs. Through the car's back window, Daniel watched his daughter collapse onto their front porch, her small body shaking with grief. Mrs. Thompson had finally moved forward to comfort her, but Lily pushed her away, reaching toward the departing police car. The drive to the station passed in a blur. Daniel answered their questions mechanically, maintaining his innocence while his thoughts remained with Lily. The processing seemed to take hours. Fingerprints, photographs, paperwork. Finally, they led him to a holding cell. The concrete walls pressed in around him as the metal door clanged shut. Daniel sank onto the thin mattress, his head falling into his hands. The cell's cold, fluorescent light cast harsh shadows, but he barely noticed. All he could see was Lily's face, tear-streaked and terrified, reaching for him as they took him away. For the first time since returning from war, Daniel Carter broke down and wept. Not for himself, but for his daughter, alone, frightened, and probably being taken to a strange place for the night. The thought of her sleeping anywhere but her own bed, without their nightly prayers and hugs, was almost more than he could bear. The cell's silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the distant sound of doors opening and closing, and the occasional echo of footsteps down the corridor. Daniel stared at the blank wall, his military training deserting him in the face of this new battlefield. One where the enemy was invisible and the stakes were higher than his own life. His daughter's safety, her future, her trust in him, everything hung in the balance. The wall stared back, offering no answers, no comfort, no hope, just cold, institutional white paint and the weight of powerlessness crushing down on his shoulders. The night stretched endlessly before him, each minute an eternity of worry about Lily. In this sterile cage, Daniel Carter, decorated veteran, devoted father, and keeper of truth, sat broken, with nothing left to do but pray. The social worker's Toyota Camry pulled away from Daniel's small house, carrying Lily into uncertainty. Through the back window, she pressed her small hand against the glass, watching her home shrink into the distance. The wooden cross necklace her daddy had given her last Christmas felt warm against her skin, its simple shape a reminder of his love. "You'll be staying with the Hendersons for now," Mrs. Patterson, the social worker, said in what she probably thought was a kind voice. "They're very nice people." Lily didn't answer. She wrapped her fingers around the cross, remembering how her daddy had carved it himself, spending hours at their kitchen table, working the wood until it was smooth. The car turned onto Oak Street, past the park where she and Daddy would feed ducks on Sunday afternoons. At the Henderson house, a neat two-story home with cream-colored siding, Mrs. Henderson waited on the porch. She had graying hair pulled back in a bun and wore a flowered apron. "Welcome, sweetheart," she said, reaching for Lily's small suitcase. Lily clutched her backpack closer, the only other possession she'd been allowed to bring. Inside was her favorite stuffed rabbit, some clothes, and the picture she'd drawn of her and Daddy holding hands under the sundae. Meanwhile, in the county jail, Daniel Carter sat on the thin mattress of his cell, his head bowed in prayer. The concrete walls seemed to close in around him, but he forced himself to focus on the words. "Lord," he whispered, "protect my little girl." Keep her safe while I can't be there." His voice cracked. "Please, don't let her think I abandoned her." "Carter," a guard called out. "You have a visitor." Pastor Miller stood on the other side of the visitation glass, his weathered face etched with concern. Daniel picked up the phone receiver. "Son," the pastor's voice came through, gentle but firm, "we're not giving up. The truth will come out." Daniel pressed his free hand against his eyes. "They took her, Pastor. They took my baby girl." "I know." Pastor Miller leaned forward. "But God hasn't forgotten either of you. Remember David in the Psalms? He cried out from the depths too. But God heard him." Across town, Maria Lopez sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups. She hadn't slept since the evidence disappeared. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's face as they took Daniel away. The phone rang. It was Pastor Miller. "I just saw Daniel," he said. "We need to keep fighting, Maria." "This is my fault," she whispered. "I should have never left that footage in the car. I should have—" "Stop right there," Pastor Miller interrupted. "The only ones at fault are the people who stole it. And God sees what they did." Back at the Henderson house, Lily lay in an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by pink walls she didn't choose, and stuffed animals that weren't hers. Mrs. Henderson had tried to be kind, making her favorite meal. But she didn't know that Lily's favorite meal was her daddy's simple beans and cornbread, not the fancy spaghetti she'd served. The wooden cross pressed against her chest as she curled onto her side. Outside, crickets chirped just like they did at home, but everything else felt wrong. The sheets smelled like lavender instead of the pine-scented detergent Daddy always bought on sale. The nightlight was too bright, not like the soft glow of her own room. In his cell, Daniel paced. 7 steps one way, 7 steps back. He thought of Lily's bedtime routine, how she always needed her glass of water, her prayers, and her good-night hug. Would anyone know to check under her bed for monsters? Would they understand that she needed her rabbit tucked in just so? Maria drove past the courthouse for the 3rd time that day, searching for any security cameras that might have caught whoever broke into her car. Her teacher's notebook sat open on the passenger seat, filled with detailed notes about Lily's bruises, dates, times, everything she'd observed. It wasn't enough, not without the footage, but she wouldn't stop documenting. Pastor Miller knelt in his study, his Bible open to Psalms. "Lord," he prayed, "give us wisdom. Show us the way forward." He thought of all the times he'd stayed silent in the past, all the wrongs he'd witnessed and ignored. "Not this time," he whispered. "Not this little girl." Night settled over the town like a heavy blanket. In 3 different locations, 3 different prayers rose into the darkness. In his cell, Daniel pressed his forehead against the cold wall. "Watch over her, Lord, until I can hold her again." In her study, Maria clutched her rosary. "Forgive me, God. Help me make this right." And in her temporary bed, Lily held her daddy's cross close to her heart. Her voice was barely a whisper in the dark room. "Please, God, bring Daddy back." The cross caught the faint moonlight from the window, its simple wooden surface smooth against her fingers. Daddy had told her that sometimes prayers were like seeds, they needed time to grow. She closed her eyes tight and continued to whisper, her small voice carrying all the faith her 8-year-old heart could hold. "Please, God, bring Daddy back." Pastor John Miller's study was a modest room, lined with well-worn books and faded photographs. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across his old oak desk. Maria Lopez sat in a weathered leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while the pastor shuffled through a metal filing cabinet in the corner. "I've kept these hidden for 15 years, Pastor Miller said, his voice heavy with regret. He pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. "Never had the courage to bring them forward. Until now." Maria leaned forward as he spread several documents across the desk. Her eyes widened as she read through police reports, witness statements, and letters dated years ago. "These are about Judge Whitmore's family?" The pastor nodded slowly, settling into his chair with a weary sigh. Jacob wasn't always like this, but his father. He tapped a letter with a trembling finger. The judge covered up Jacob's first incident when he was just 17, threatened to destroy my church's funding if I spoke up about what I saw. What happened? Maria asked softly. Jacob had hurt another child. The judge made it disappear, just like they're trying to do now with Lily. Pastor Miller's voice cracked. I chose silence then, convinced myself it was for the greater good. But that silence, it let evil grow. Maria picked up one of the letters, reading the judge's signature at the bottom. Her teacher's heart ached, thinking of all the children who might have been hurt because good people stayed quiet. She thought of Lily's brave little face in class, of Daniel sitting alone in a jail cell. I can't stay quiet anymore, she said, straightening her shoulders. These documents, combined with what I witnessed with Lily, it's enough to open an investigation, isn't it? The pastor nodded. But Maria, you need to understand what you're risking. Your job, your reputation. I took this job to protect children. Maria interrupted, her voice finding strength. What kind of teacher would I be if I let fear stop me from doing that now? They spent the next hour planning. Pastor Miller knew a reporter at the state newspaper who had investigated corruption before. Maria had detailed records of Lily's behavioral changes, the bruises she'd documented, and witnesses from the school who'd seen Jacob lurking around. We'll need to move quickly, Pastor Miller said, reaching for his phone. The longer Daniel stays in jail, the more Lily suffers. Maria watched him dial, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. The reporter answered on the third ring. Miss Reynolds? This is Pastor John Miller from First Baptist. We have a story you need to hear about Judge Whitmore. For the next 2 hours, they laid out everything. The pastor's old documents, Maria's testimony, the suspicious disappearance of the video evidence, Daniel's arrest. The reporter asked sharp questions, taking detailed notes. This is exactly the kind of story we investigate, Miss Reynolds said finally. I'll have a team looking into it by morning, but I need you both to go on record. Maria caught the pastor's eye. He nodded encouragingly. Yes, she said firmly. I'll testify to everything I've seen. So will I, Pastor Miller added. It's time the truth came to light. After the call ended, Maria stood by the window, watching the sun set behind the church steeple. What happens now? Now we pray, Pastor Miller said. And we prepare. The judge won't take this quietly. That evening, in the county jail, Daniel Carter sat on his narrow bunk, staring at the concrete walls. The guard's footsteps echoed down the corridor, stopping at his cell. Carter, the guard called. Your lawyer's here. Daniel followed him to the visitation room, where his court-appointed attorney waited with an unusual smile. Things are moving, Daniel. The state paper is investigating Judge Whitmore. They've got witnesses coming forward, including your daughter's teacher and Pastor Miller. For the first time since his arrest, Daniel felt a spark of hope in his chest. He thought of Lily, imagined holding her again. They're really looking into it? The reporter called me for comment. They're digging deep, not just about Lily's case, but years of corruption. This could change everything. Daniel closed his eyes, saying a silent prayer of thanks. When he opened them, there were tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. Tell them thank you. Tell them. He paused, thinking of Maria and the pastor risking everything for his daughter. Tell them they're answering a father's prayers. The lawyer nodded, gathering his papers. Keep your head up, Daniel. The truth's starting to come out. Back in his cell that night, Daniel lay on his bunk, hope warming his heart for the first time in days. He touched the spot where his wooden cross usually hung, thinking of Lily wearing hers. Hold on, baby girl, he whispered into the darkness. Daddy's coming home. The morning sun blazed over the town square as reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Camera crews jostled for position while journalists clutched notepads and microphones, their voices creating a buzz of excitement. Above them, a massive banner headline on the local newspaper's building read, Judge's Family Scandal. Voices Silenced? Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News stood before her cameraman, her professional demeanor masking her excitement at covering what could be the biggest story of her career. We're live in front of Clayton County Courthouse, where allegations of corruption have surfaced against one of the most prominent judicial figures in the state. Inside his chambers, Judge Whitmore's hands trembled as he watched the coverage on his small television. His secretary knocked tentatively. "Sir, there are reporters requesting comments about the pastor's allegations." The judge's face, usually stern and controlled, showed cracks of worry. He straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed over his 30 years on the bench. The weight of his position, once a source of pride, now felt like a stone around his neck. On Main Street, the divide in the community grew starker by the hour. Outside Pete's diner, longtime residents argued over coffee and pie. "That Carter fellow's always been trouble," muttered Harold Jenkins, a real estate developer who'd done business with the Whitmores for years. "Trouble?" Sarah Martinez, a retired schoolteacher, shot back. "The man works 3 jobs to care for his little girl. When's the last time you saw Judge Whitmore's son do an honest day's work?" The local news vans parked outside the jail drew curious onlookers. Some carried hastily made signs, "Justice for Lily," and "Truth can't be silenced." Among them stood Maria, her teacher's badge still pinned to her blouse, speaking to a reporter about the bruises she'd documented on Lily. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said, her voice catching. "But I was afraid. We were all afraid." Pastor John stood beside her, his weathered face resolute. "Fear is what kept us quiet for too long," he told the gathered crowd. "But God's truth has a way of coming to light." The story spread like wildfire across social media. Free Daniel Carter trended nationally. News outlets picked up on the compelling narrative. A poor single father, a war veteran, fighting against a powerful judge to protect his daughter. Inside the jail, Daniel sat on his thin mattress, the concrete walls closing in. The guard, Joe Matthews, who'd known Daniel since high school, switched on the small television in the common area. "Thought you might want to see this," Joe said quietly. Daniel watched as footage played of Lily's teacher speaking to reporters. "Daniel Carter is a good man," Maria declared, her voice stronger now. "He protected his daughter when no one else would listen. Now it's our turn to protect them both." The camera panned to show Pastor John holding up documents. "These papers prove a pattern of intimidation going back years. Judge Whitmore's family has used their influence to bury uncomfortable truths, but not this time." More people gathered outside the jail as the day progressed. The crowd grew from dozens to hundreds. Local shop owners brought coffee and sandwiches. Parents came with their children, some of them Lily's classmates, holding drawings and cards for her. In his cell, Daniel could hear their voices growing stronger, more unified. The sound started faintly, then built into a rhythmic chant that echoed through the jail's corridors. "Free Daniel! Protect Lily! Free Daniel! Protect Lily!" He moved to his small window, pressing his hands against the cool bars. Tears welled in his eyes as the chants grew louder, clearer. They were fighting for him, for Lily. All these people who'd been silent before were finally finding their voices. Daniel sank onto his knees, tears streaming down his face as the chants continued outside. His thoughts turned to Lily, hoping she could hear the voices too, hoping she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Through his tears, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the courage of those who dared to stand up and speak the truth. The chants echoed through the jail corridors. "Free Daniel! Protect Lily! Free Daniel! Protect Lily!" Each repetition seemed to shake the very foundations of the power structure that had kept so many silent for so long. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open as Maria Lopez walked to the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine was straight. She smoothed her simple navy dress and took her oath, her voice quiet but clear in the packed chamber. "Miss Lopez, please tell the court about your observations of Lily Carter," the prosecutor said. Maria glanced at Daniel, who sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, then lifted her chin. "I've been Lily's teacher for 8 months. In March, I started noticing changes in her behavior. She became withdrawn, especially during recess. Then, I saw the bruises." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Whitmore's face remained stone, still, but his knuckles whitened on his gavel. "Could you describe these bruises?" the prosecutor asked. "Finger marks on her upper arms, like someone had grabbed her roughly." Maria's voice cracked. When I asked her about them, she'd just shake her head and say she was clumsy. But I've taught third grade for 15 years. I know the difference between playground accidents and— She paused, drawing a steadying breath. And something deliberate. The prosecutor nodded. And the security footage you discovered? Yes. Our school has cameras in the parking lot. I found recordings of Jacob Whitmore approaching Lily multiple times when he thought no one was watching. He would corner her, lean over her. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She looked so scared. Jacob shifted in his seat behind the prosecution table, tugging at his expensive tie. His father, the judge, stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. And what happened to this footage? It was stolen from my car the day before I planned to bring it to court. I had locked it in my glove compartment, but someone broke in and took only that, nothing else. The gallery buzzed again. Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor, this clearly suggests— Move on. Judge Matthews, who had replaced Judge Whitmore for this hearing, ordered firmly. Pastor John Miller was called next. The elderly man walked slowly to the stand, his weathered Bible clutched in his gnarled hands. After taking his oath, he looked out over the familiar faces of his congregation members scattered throughout the courtroom. Pastor Miller, Daniel's attorney began, you approached the court with information about a previous incident involving the Whitmore family. Could you tell us about that? The pastor's voice quavered but grew stronger as he spoke. 15 years ago, I witnessed something similar to what young Lily reported. Another child came to me, frightened, with stories about Jacob Whitmore. He was just a teenager then. Judge Whitmore's face flushed dark red. Jacob stared at the floor. What did you do with this information? The attorney asked. Pastor Miller's shoulders slumped. To my eternal shame, I did nothing. Judge Whitmore came to me, spoke about protecting the reputation of our community, about how accusations like this could destroy a young man's future. He implied my ministry might suffer if I pursued it. The pastor pulled a yellowed envelope from his Bible. But I kept the letters, every threatening note, every suggestion of consequences if I spoke up. The bailiff carried the envelope to Judge Matthews, who examined the contents with a deepening frown. Why come forward now? Daniel's attorney asked. Because I cannot bear the weight of silence any longer. Pastor Miller's eyes filled with tears. When I saw little Lily Carter stand up and speak her truth, I knew God was giving me a second chance to do what's right. The doors opened again, and 2 bailiffs led Daniel into the courtroom. Despite his shackles and prison uniform, he walked with dignity, his eyes searching the gallery until he found Maria and Pastor Miller. He gave them a small nod of gratitude. Jacob Whitmore was called to testify next. Gone was his usual swagger as he approached the stand. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Mr. Whitmore, the prosecutor began, can you explain why multiple witnesses place you near Lily Carter's school on several occasions, despite having no legitimate reason to be there? Jacob loosened his collar. I sometimes drive by there on my way to other places. Other places? The school is not on the route between your home and office, is it? I take different routes sometimes, Jacob muttered. And your interactions with Lily Carter? I never touched her, Jacob snapped, then immediately looked at his father, who had closed his eyes. That's not what I asked, the prosecutor said quietly. Why did you approach an 8-year-old girl repeatedly? Why did security footage of these encounters disappear? Jacob's hand shook as he reached for the water glass beside him. I don't know anything about any footage. Multiple witnesses saw your car near Miss Lopez's house the night the evidence disappeared. Can you explain that? I want to speak to my lawyer, Jacob whispered, sweat now running down his temples. The prosecutor pressed on. What about the incident Daniel Carter witnessed? The night he found you with his daughter in the school playground? Jacob's face had gone pale. He pulled at his tie again, loosening it further. His eyes darted between his father and his lawyer, panic rising in his expression. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Matthews said firmly, you will answer the question. The gallery leaned forward, breaths held. Daniel sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Jacob. The sound of a pen dropping could have echoed in the tense silence. Jacob's voice cracked. Sweat trickled down his face as he squirmed under the collective gaze of the courtroom. The defense attorney rose slowly, adjusting his tie as he approached Maria Lopez. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the high courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. "Miss Lopez," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "isn't it true that you have no actual proof of these alleged incidents?" Maria's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I documented everything I saw. The bruises, the behavior changes, the fear in Lily's eyes whenever—" "Objection! Speculation!" Jacob's lawyer interrupted. "Sustained," the judge said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The questioning continued, back and forth like a tense tennis match. Jacob Whitmore sat at the defense table, maintaining his practiced smile, but beads of sweat had begun forming on his forehead. When Jacob finally took the stand, his usual swagger seemed forced. The prosecutor, a seasoned woman with steel-gray hair, approached him methodically. "Mr. Whitmore, where were you on March 15th at 3:15 p.m.? "I was at the gym," Jacob replied smoothly. "Like I am every Tuesday." "Interesting." The prosecutor held up a document. "Because your gym's records show no entry that day. In fact, security footage places your car outside Riverside Elementary at exactly that time." Jacob's smile flickered. "I must have my dates mixed up. Like you mixed up telling Officer Martinez you'd never spoken to Lily Carter, but then told Detective Brooks you'd only spoken to her once in the presence of her teacher?" Color drained from Jacob's face. In the gallery, Judge Whitmore shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles white against the wooden bench. "I speak to lots of people," Jacob said, his voice rising. "You can't expect me to remember every conversation." "But this wasn't just any conversation, was it, Mr. Whitmore?" The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "This was about a little girl who specifically identified you in this very courtroom." "She's lying," Jacob snapped, his composure cracking. "She's just a stupid kid who—" He caught himself, but too late. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's shoulders tensed, his handcuffs clinking as his fists clenched. "Just a stupid kid who—" "What? Mr. Whitmore?" The prosecutor pressed. I didn't mean. Was she just a stupid kid when you cornered her at recess? Just a stupid kid when you grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises? You don't understand," Jacob's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like being the judge's son? Everyone watching, expecting perfection?" His carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Judge Whitmore stared at his son, horror dawning on his face. "I never meant to hurt her," Jacob continued, words tumbling out now. I wanted her to be quiet. She saw me doing something I shouldn't have, behind the school. If word got out," his shoulders shook. "Dad always said, image was everything. I couldn't let some little girl ruin everything." Tears streamed down Jacob's face. "I tried to scare her into keeping quiet, but she wouldn't. Then her father started nosing around, and I panicked." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Whitmore slowly removed his glasses, pressing his palms against his eyes. "So you arranged for the evidence to disappear?" the prosecutor asked quietly. "I knew people who could help. Dad's always had connections." Jacob's voice trailed off as he realized what he'd admitted. He looked at his father, desperate for help, but Judge Whitmore sat motionless, face buried in his hands. In the gallery, Maria held Lily close. The little girl's eyes were wide, fixed on Jacob's crumbling form on the witness stand. "Daddy was right," Lily whispered, her small voice barely audible in the heavy silence of the courtroom. She clutched Maria's hand tighter, watching as the truth she'd known all along finally came to light. Jacob slumped in the witness chair, his confession hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. The polished veneer of the judge's privileged son had finally shattered, revealing the frightened, morally bankrupt man beneath. Daniel sat straight-backed at the defense table, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. His daughter's courage had started this moment. And now, finally, the truth had broken through the walls of power and privilege that had protected Jacob for so long. The prosecutor turned to the judge, who still hadn't looked up. "Your Honor, in light of this testimony, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Daniel Carter immediately." The silence stretched on for several long moments before Judge Whitmore finally raised his head. His face had aged years in the past few minutes, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. He looked at his son, then at Daniel, then finally at little Lily. "This court," he began, his voice hoarse, "will take a 1-hour recess to consider these developments." He stood shakily, no longer the imposing figure who had commanded the courtroom just hours before. As bailiffs led Jacob away, his sobs echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. The carefully constructed world of privilege and protection the Whitmores had built was crumbling, brought down by the brave words of a little girl who refused to be silenced. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Whitmore slowly rose from his seat. His face, usually stern and commanding, now showed the deep lines of a man carrying an unbearable weight. He removed his black robe with trembling hands, carefully folding it and placing it on the bench, a gesture heavy with finality. "In light of recent revelations," he began, his voice hoarse, "I can no longer serve this court with the integrity it demands. I hereby resign from my position, effective immediately." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Daniel Carter sat straight-backed in his chair, his attorney's hand reassuring on his shoulder. Across the aisle, Jacob Whitmore stared at the floor, his confession still echoing in everyone's minds. The interim judge, hastily brought in from a neighboring county, took his place at the bench. He was younger, with kind eyes that held both wisdom and compassion. He cleared his throat, bringing order to the murmuring crowd. "In the matter of Daniel Carter," he announced, his voice clear and steady, "all charges are hereby dismissed." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Furthermore, regarding the custody petition, this court grants full custody of Lily Carter to her father, Daniel Carter, effective immediately." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to break something loose in the room. Daniel's shoulders began to shake as tears welled in his eyes. His attorney squeezed his arm, whispering, "You did it, Daniel. You really did it." Maria Lopez, sitting in the front row, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The retired pastor nodding beside her, a quiet smile of vindication on his weathered face. They had stood by Daniel when so many others wouldn't, and now truth had prevailed. "Daddy!" Lily's voice cut through the courtroom noise. She broke free from her social worker's gentle hold, running toward her father. Daniel met her halfway, dropping to his knees as she crashed into his arms. He lifted her up, spinning her around as tears streamed down both their faces. "My baby girl," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion, "I told you I'd never stop fighting for you." Lily's arms tightened around his neck. "I knew you'd come back, Daddy. I prayed every night." The wooden cross necklace he'd given her caught the light as she moved, a simple symbol of the faith that had carried them through. Daniel touched it gently, remembering all the nights he'd spent in his cell, clinging to hope and trust in something bigger than himself. Members of the community who had supported them began approaching, offering handshakes and hugs. Mrs. Wilson, from the diner, where Daniel sometimes worked, squeezed his shoulder, tears in her eyes. "Your breakfast spot will always be waiting for you two," she said warmly. The interim judge watched from his bench, allowing this moment of healing to unfold naturally. The courthouse staff, who had witnessed countless dramas unfold in this room, wiped away their own tears at the scene before them. Maria made her way through the crowd to Daniel and Lily. "I'm so sorry I lost that evidence," she began, but Daniel shook his head. "You never gave up," he said, reaching out to clasp her hand. "That's what mattered." The retired pastor joined them, his Bible tucked under his arm. "The truth always finds its way to the light," he said softly. "Sometimes it just needs brave hearts to help it along." Lily, still in her father's arms, looked around at all the faces, some familiar, some new, all now sharing in their joy. The fear that had shadowed her young face for so long had lifted, replaced by a brightness that touched everyone who saw it. Daniel set Lily down but kept hold of her hand. Together they began walking toward the courthouse doors. The crowd parted naturally, creating a path for them. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting warm patches on the marble floor ahead of them. As they reached the heavy wooden doors, Daniel paused. He looked down at his daughter, seeing in her face everything he'd fought for. She smiled up at him, squeezing his hand 3 times, their secret code for "I love you." The doors swung open, revealing the courthouse steps filled with townspeople who had gathered outside. A cheer went up as Daniel and Lily emerged into the sunshine. People clapped and called out words of support and celebration. Some held handmade signs, "Justice prevails," and "Welcome home, Lily." Others threw flower petals that danced in the autumn breeze. The local paper's photographer captured the moment as father and daughter stood at the top of the steps, their hands clasped tight, faces glowing with joy and relief. The truth had not just set them free, it had given them back to each other, stronger than before. As they descended the courthouse steps together, the cheers of the crowd washing over them, Daniel and Lily stepped into their new beginning, hand in hand, hearts full of gratitude and hope. The late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window of the Carter home, casting a warm glow on Daniel and Lily as they unpacked brown paper grocery bags. For the first time in weeks, their refrigerator would be full. Daniel watched as Lily carefully arranged milk, eggs, and fresh vegetables on the shelves, her face bright with simple joy. "Daddy, look, real orange juice." Lily held up the container like it was treasure, her eyes sparkling. "Not the powder kind." Daniel chuckled, his heart swelling. "That's right, sweetheart. And we got your favorite cereal, too." A gentle knock at the door interrupted their unpacking. Mrs. Henderson from next door stood on their porch, holding a steaming casserole dish. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's just my chicken and rice casserole." Before Daniel could respond, more neighbors appeared. Mr. Johnson carried a bouquet of fresh-cut flowers from his garden. The Martinez family brought still warm cornbread. Soon, their small kitchen counter was crowded with dishes and well wishes. "We should have stood by you sooner," Mrs. Henderson said softly, placing a weathered hand on Daniel's arm. "We're so sorry." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding his thanks. Lily darted between the adults, arranging the flowers in an old mason jar, her face glowing with pride. The screen door creaked again as Maria Lopez and Pastor Miller arrived together. Maria carried a homemade apple pie, while the pastor held a worn Bible and a gentle smile. "Something smells wonderful in here," Pastor Miller said, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the bounty of food. Come in," Lily called out, rushing to hug Maria around the waist. "Daddy, can we have a party?" Daniel looked around at these people neighbors who had become family, strangers who had become champions of truth. "I think we're already having one, sweetheart." They gathered around the small kitchen table, pulling in chairs from every room. The mismatched plates and simple surroundings couldn't diminish the warmth of the moment. Pastor Miller said grace, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked God for justice and healing. Maria helped Lily serve everyone, the little girl beaming as she carefully carried plates. "Miss Lopez," Lily whispered loudly, "did you see all the flowers? They're prettier than the ones at church." Laughter rippled through the room, genuine and healing. Daniel watched as his daughter moved confidently among their guests, no trace of fear in her movements. The sight nearly brought him to tears. "You know," Pastor Miller said, setting down his fork, "what happened here, it's already changing things. 3 families came to me yesterday, ready to speak about old wrongs. Your courage, Daniel, and Lily's truth, they've given others strength." Daniel shook his head modestly. "We just did what was right. Sometimes that's the hardest thing," Maria added softly. "But look what it's brought." She gestured around the room, where conversation and warmth had replaced the lonely echoes of their past. As the evening wore on, neighbors drifted home with promises to return. The kitchen was cleaner than before they came, leftovers carefully packed away in containers that Lily insisted on labeling with her best handwriting. Maria and Pastor Miller were the last to leave. The pastor hugged them both, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "God's light shines brightest through broken places," he said, squeezing Daniel's shoulder. After they left, Daniel and Lily stood in their kitchen, now filled with flowers and food and friendship. The setting sun painted the walls gold, and the house felt different, like a home renewed. "Time for bed, sweetheart," Daniel said, noting how Lily's eyes were growing heavy despite her excitement. "Can I take my new teddy bear?" she asked, clutching the soft brown bear Mrs. Henderson had brought. "The one with the red bow?" "Of course you can," Daniel followed their familiar bedtime routine, helping her brush her teeth, listening to her prayers, tucking her in just the way she liked. But tonight, there was no tension in her small shoulders, no fearful glances at the window. "Daddy?" Lily murmured, already half asleep. "Yes, baby? I'm happy we're home." Daniel stroked her hair, watching as her breathing deepened and evened out. No nightmares creased her brow, no whimpers escaped her lips. His daughter slept the peaceful sleep of the safe and loved, her new teddy bear tucked securely under one arm. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep, his heart full of gratitude. The moonlight painted silver streaks across her bed, and the gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of the garden flowers through her window. In this moment, their humble home felt like the richest place on earth. The morning sun painted the church's community garden in soft, dappled light. Daniel Carter knelt in the rich soil, his weathered hands working the earth as Lily carefully placed marigold seedlings into the holes he'd prepared. Around them, townsfolk moved with purpose, some weeding, others hauling mulch or arranging stones along the garden paths. "Like this, Daddy?" Lily asked, gently patting soil around a tiny plant's base. "Perfect, sweetheart," Daniel smiled, watching her small fingers work with careful determination. The wooden cross necklace, his gift to her, caught the sunlight as she leaned forward, a constant reminder of their journey. Maria, Lily's teacher, worked nearby, planting purple petunias. She'd become a regular presence in their lives, her quiet strength a reminder that good people still existed in the world. The retired pastor moved between the garden beds, offering encouragement and occasional gardening advice, his voice carrying the same gentle authority it had when he'd first stood up for them. "These flowers are going to be so pretty," Lily declared, surveying their work. "Yellow like sunshine." Mrs. Thompson, who ran the local diner, approached with a tray of lemonade. "Thought you all might need some refreshments," she called out. Just months ago, she'd been one of the townspeople who'd turned away when Daniel walked past. Now, her smile was genuine, her eyes kind. Daniel accepted a glass with gratitude, watching as Lily thanked Mrs. Thompson with a quick hug. His daughter's ability to forgive and love freely never ceased to amaze him. The trauma they'd endured hadn't dimmed her light. If anything, it burned brighter now. "The garden's really coming along," Tom Harrison commented, wiping sweat from his brow as he wheeled over another load of mulch. As the auto shop owner who'd kept Daniel employed through the worst times, Tom had been one of their few early supporters. "It's what community looks like," the pastor added, pausing to rest on a nearby bench. "Working together, healing together." Daniel watched as several children from Lily's class joined her, all of them giggling as they planted flowers. There was no trace now of the isolation she'd faced during the trial. The truth had set them all free, in more ways than one. The wooden cross bounced against Lily's chest as she showed her friends how to properly space the seedlings. Daniel remembered the night he'd given it to her, how small and scared she'd seemed in that foster home. Now, she wore it proudly, a symbol of faith and perseverance. As the morning wore on, more townspeople arrived. Some brought food, others brought tools or plants from their own gardens. The community garden had become more than just a place to grow flowers. It was healing ground, where old wounds could mend and new connections could flourish. Daniel sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the scene before him. Just months ago, he'd felt utterly alone, fighting against powers that seemed insurmountable. Now, surrounded by allies and friends, watching his daughter bloom like the flowers they planted, he felt rich beyond measure. "Hey, Mr. Carter," called Jenny, one of Lily's classmates. "Can you help us make a special space for butterflies?" "Sure thing," Daniel replied, moving to help the children arrange flowering plants that would attract butterflies. As he worked, he caught snippets of their chatter. Innocent plans for summer fun, hopes for the garden's future, simple dreams untainted by fear. The morning stretched toward noon, and slowly the crowd began to thin. Some headed home for lunch, others to weekend errands, each pausing to admire their collective work. The garden beds now burst with color, yellows, purples, pinks, and reds, creating a patchwork of hope. Finally, only Daniel and Lily remained, putting finishing touches on their section. The setting sun painted everything in gold, making the flowers glow like tiny flames. Lily stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked around at their work with pride. She touched the wooden cross at her neck, then turned to Daniel with eyes full of wisdom beyond her years. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear, "you saved me." Daniel knelt before his daughter, tears welling in his eyes as he took her small hands in his. Looking at her brave, beautiful face, he shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart," he replied, voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." The setting sun bathed them in golden light as they stood in their garden of hope, father and daughter, survivors and victors, their love stronger than any darkness that had tried to defeat them. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.